Hi guys, so great to be with you today. What I'm going to show you today is kind of explain a little bit about number sense and how students progress in their number sense skills. Okay, so what I have on the screen here for you is a visual of kind of the path that a normal student follows when they're working through their number sense. So when they're getting ready to slide, these are kind of like the foundational skills or the precursor skills. If you think about it, kind of like they're getting ready to slide, they're climbing up the ladder so they can then slide later on. Okay, so the first skill that students normally have is they have like that verbal counting. So they're without any objects or anything else, they can just verbally count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and they can just count out loud. Okay. The next skill that students develop is then they can count objects. So if you have a group of 4 objects in front of them, they can touch each one and count 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, they can do that object counting. The next piece that students have is they are able to answer how many. So again, if I have those 4 objects out and I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, and I said, Kelly, how many did you just count? They should be able to say 4. Okay, so they're able to tell you how many that they just counted. Okay, the other piece that we have here is the next step is something called subitizing. And subitizing is the skill that students need. It's the ability to know how many objects are in a group without having to actually count them one by one. So if you think about the side of a dice, like the side of those cubes, and how they might have like 5 dots on them. If a student is good at subitizing, you can hold up that picture and they should be able to say 5 without having to actually count or kind of look at it or study it. They should just be able to see that group and know that it's 5. The reason that that's important is because when students are able to subitize, then when you say the number 5, in their mind, they don't see the number 5, they see the quantity of 5. And when they see the quantity of 5, then they're able to be really flexible with their numbers and are able to manipulate those numbers in their head better when they see the quantity. A good example of that would be a traditional number line. So if you think about a traditional number line, I'm going to go ahead and pull one up here for you. So if you think about like a traditional number line, and I say, show me where 5 is on this number line, most of us would point directly to this number 5 and say that's 5. But what we want students to understand instead is that that's not 5. That's the number 5. But we want them to understand that quantity. So 5 would actually be, they would actually circle this 0 through 5 because this is 5. Those 5 little lines make up 5. Okay, so again, we want students to kind of have that quantity in their minds versus just seeing the numbers. Because when students see numbers in their minds, it's hard for them to break apart those numbers to add, subtract, multiply, divide, because all they have in their mind is just that abstract picture of what the number looks like versus having that quantity image in their mind. Okay. So with subitizing, there's lots of different ways to work on that with students. With number sense, we always say that number sense can't be caught. It can't be taught. It has to be caught. So subitizing and a lot of these other activities I'm going to show you aren't things that you necessarily have to change up your whole curriculum or the whole way you're doing things. It's a way for you to sprinkle in different pieces of subitizing throughout your day. So subitizing, again, is just one of those tools you can kind of sprinkle in throughout the day as you're walking down the hallway, a real quick warm up before you start your math time and those pieces. So this sheet that I clicked on, and again, I just got to it because each of these words, if they have a little line under them, will have a link. Okay, so this link takes me to this sheet where it talks about kind of subitizing what it is. Just some different notes to remember. When you're doing subitizing, you want to make sure that you kind of are switching up your presentation method between like dot patterns or rec and recs or 10 frames. That way students don't get used or don't start thinking that the only way to represent 5 is just with that same image. They want to have lots of different images of 5. So it could be 5 dots on the side of a dice. It could be 5 chips in a 10 frame. Just vary your presentation method so students don't get used to one pattern. Okay, and if you're worrying that happens, then one thing you can do is if you're up in front of the class and you hold up a number 5 and you say, show me this on your whiteboard. If students are drawing a pattern, but it doesn't equal 5, then you know that they're really just kind of memorizing the patterns and not necessarily understanding the quantity. So that's where you'd want to go back and do some more subitizing work. Okay. So really, if you think about age-wise, kind of where this fits in. So before 3 years old, they should be able to do one and more than one. And then once they're 3 years old, they should be able to subitize the numbers one, two, or three. So quantities of one, two, or three. And then once they're 4 years old, they should be able to subitize quantities of four and above. And normally, we don't want to have kiddos subitize more than 10, just because it would be really hard to kind of see those quantities of more than 10. So down here are some resources. So these are some subitizing cards that you can print off and just kind of flash to your class to do a real quick warm-up before math class starts. Okay, there's some specific subitizing activities and cards that go with them, and also some specific subitizing mats. Okay, so if you think about kind of these precursor skills, these are, like I said, those precursor skills. So if you're not sure if your students have those, if they don't have those, there's what they call our early numeracy assessment, which is right over here. Okay, so with the early numeracy assessment, it's a quick assessment that you can do either whole group or one-on-one, and you can kind of administer this to your students and kind of see what holes they have, where they're at with a couple of things. Okay, because if they do have a lot of holes in these kind of precursor areas, you do want to make sure you fill those holes before they start going down the slide in the other skills that we're going to get to in a second. All right, so down at the bottom, there's different tabs for each of those 4 areas that we just talked about. Okay, there's a little prompt that you would give them. Okay, so you could give them the numbers 1 through 5, and they would be able to recognize them. They could recognize numbers 3 through 5 in a geometric pattern. So if you had a dot pattern of 3 dots in, the shape of a triangle, could they recognize that that's 3? Okay. And again, there's just some different questions you would ask kiddos based on the different areas. And if your students are solid on all these skills, then you know you're ready to go on to the next part. All right, so once students have mastered all of these skills, you've given the assessment, they're good to go, then you're ready to go on to the next piece. You're kind of ready to start sliding down the slide a little bit. Okay, so when you're sliding down the slide, there's really kind of 4 phases kiddos go through. So the first phase is a direct modeling phase. And in that direct modeling phase, that's where if you give a problem like I had 2 apples, you have 2 apples, how many apples do we have all together? The students can actually take 2 chips, put down another 2 chips, and then count 1, 2, 3, 4 to get their answer. Okay, in this counting phase, the next phase down, that's where students get into this part where they can hold that first number in their mind and then count on. So if I use that same addition problem, if I say I have 2 apples, you have 2 apples, how many apples do we have all together? Then what the student could do is hold that first 2 in their mind and then just count on 3, 4 and get the answer of 4. Okay? The next area that we dive into is that derive facts. So derive facts is where you can derive the answer to a fact problem based on another fact that you know. So if you know 2 plus 2 equals 4, then you know 2 plus 3 equals 5 because that's a double plus 1. Okay, so that's why that fluency or that flexibility with numbers is so important in that subitizing phase, in that counting phase, just because we really want to make sure students, again, are seeing that quantity in their mind and not just the numbers. Okay, after students progress through that, then they get to the point where they should be pretty fluent with their facts. Okay. So to kind of figure out where your students are in this area, there's a different assessment called the number sense assessment. Okay, this number sense assessment is similar to the one similar to the early numeracy assessment, where you're going to give it to your kiddos and then it'll allow you to see what holes that your students still have. Okay, so if you take a look here, there's a different tab for each piece.